Okay, just keep my color code straight. I'm going to use the red wire to the red wire. I've already crimped on a butt connector, and before I did that I put some heat shrink tubing on it so I can slide the heat shrink tubing over this and shrink it. And then I'm going to do the same with the white wire. That takes care of the two of the alternator. Now let's splice in the two to the auxiliary fuel pump. Well, I'm out of butt type connectors to finish these two connections, and it's starting to rain. So I think I'm going to have to quit for today, because by the time I get back from the store, it's probably going to be raining heavy enough that I'm not going to want to be out here. Alright, had a couple of days of rain, and now it finally stopped raining, so I'm back working on the wiring today. Got some more butt connectors. Now I got some to heat shrink these, just like I did with these. Okay, now those are done. Alright, now I put a couple of small wire ties on the cable just to keep it all together, and now I'm going to put some wire loom around it. I picked up several feet of this wiring loom at the hardware store. It's just a plastic tubing to protect the wiring, and it's got this split in it which makes it easy to install around the cables that are already existing. Also, you can get wires to come out of it, like if you get a multi-conductor cable and you want to just have two wires come off at one area, and then further down the stream other wires can come out. So I'll explain that more by showing you. But I'm going to install this, and I'm going to have to cut it because it's not going to fit through that grommet right there. So I'll let the grommet do the work protecting that one little area, and then I'll see if I can't get it to go around this cable here, where it's going to go through there to protect that. Okay, so now I've installed the loom, and I've taped up this end here, and down here you can see where, because of the split, I'm able to let those two wires that go to the auxiliary fuel pump exit, and then it continues on over to here, and I cut it right there before it gets to the grommet. So I'm going to fasten it at that point right there. This arm is kind of in the way, makes it kind of difficult to get at. Oh, I can get to it from the bottom here. Okay. Alright, this is a tight space. I couldn't really get in there with the tape, so I'm just going to use wire ties. I'll probably put a couple more on there further down, but I'll wait until I get the tractor started, and when I raise the load of these arms right here, we'll be out of the way and make it a lot easier. It's going to be too difficult for me to get that wiring loom to pass through there and around these cables, mainly because of this big heavy cable here that goes to the preheater in the intake manifold. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rely on this outer sheathing on this cable to protect these smaller conductor wires, and then I'll probably put a little piece of PVC tubing around this wire right here where it passes through that, where I'm going to pass it through here to protect the outer jacket of insulation on this wire. Okay, here's another hunk of that polyvinyl tubing, and that'll give it some protection where it goes through that metal bracket. Alright, so for this short section through here, I didn't bother putting any wiring loom on, and I just wire tied these three big cables. That's my big battery cable from the alternator, the battery terminal on the alternator, my multi-conductor cable from the alternator and auxiliary fuel pump lines, and then the big heavy cable that goes to the air intake heater. And then right through here where the battery cable goes through this metal bracket and there's no grommet, I have that PVC sheathing on there to protect it, or that polyvinyl. Alright, and up here under the dash I've routed the battery, the big heavy red cable from the alternator battery terminal, and the multi-conductor cable up through the grommets. And so then they come up here and they're going to go right under the dash. Now I've got the red cable here, and now I've got to find a spot to mount that circuit breaker. Alright, I'm going to disconnect this light switch now because it's only hooked up right now to the wiring going to the lights. And then also you got this one wire, fuse wire, going up here to the horn switch. So I'm going to disconnect all that and get it out of my way. A quick look at this wiring here before I disconnect it tells me the whole story. 12 volts was coming in right here on this wire that's disconnected. going to this screw terminal. From this screw terminal, it was feeding through this fuse, the lighting, and then also through this inline fuse, it was going to the fuel gauge, any of the electric gauges. And then through this other inline fuse, it's feeding the horn switch. And then after it goes through this fuse, it goes into the switch, and depending on what position the switch is in, it would either send voltage out through this terminal, which has two wires going to it, which are probably for the two headlights in the front, or this terminal, which has one big red wire going to it, which is probably to the other, I don't know, I'll have to figure out the lighting later. Alright, I was going to unscrew these, try and save these wire terminals on here so I wouldn't have to remake those, but these screws are really corroded and stuck on there, and rather than put any penetrant on them, try and get them off, I'm just going to cut the wires. Because there's a good possibility I'm going to end up wanting to replace this wiring harness right here anyways, because it goes through right here on the frame. You can see that the wiring is already damaged. Matter of fact, this wire looks like it's it doesn't look like it's frayed yet, but you can see that's a bad spot right there. I pull it down, you can see that more of the wiring is exposed. So as this moves and it rubs here on this angle iron or this steel, it's rubbing off the protective coating. So I'm thinking I might be able to snake another cable like this type here, this multi-conductor cable with a nice jacket on it. All right, my little drill press vise is the perfect thing for the job of holding that while I solder this connector on the end in that tight space underneath the dash here. Okay, I've got this one soldered on, and I taped up the junction there, and now this is going to go to my 30 amp circuit breaker. Ideally I would mount this to here on the bracket somewhere. None of the holes here are small enough, so I'd have to drill new holes, and quite frankly I just kind of want to get moving on this. The other problem is, well, you know, maybe I could pop one screw in there, wouldn't hurt. That shouldn't be too hard to do. I could use my right angle, my 90-degree drill to get in there. Let's see if I can't drill through that steel. I was going to use a small screw with a washer and nuts to screw this down to the metal here, and then I realized because this metal's so thick, I decided instead what I'm going to do is I've drilled a hole, and I'm going to run a tap through it and thread it, and so I'll have a threaded hole or two to mount this to.